While the human fleet recovered from the battle, sending some of its ships back for refit and repair, rearming themselves, and of course recovering the lost Xenos, those that they could actually save, they decided it was a good time to get a hold of the hard drives, or at least what counts as a hard drive, in the Xeno fleets. They began to comb through it as fast as they could, since they knew it was possible there was another group of Xenos heading their way, and if they weren't ready for the onslaught, they might not have as good of an outcome. It wasn't long before they discovered the star charts that led to the entirety of the greater galactic union. It was amazing how far it stretched. When they color coded it to decide who had what space, it was amazing the amount that was covered by the galactic union. But oddly enough, which ones were controlled by the individual Xenos, well, that map changed completely. As it turns out, the humans were right. The tributes was just a way of gaining more and more control over time, and eventually each Xeno species would be relegated to its own homeworld and possibly a couple of its satellites. If they were lucky, their own galaxy, and then the rest, even though they had colonized it, even though they had terraformed it, it would become the property of the Galactic Union. More often than not, strip mined for its resources and sent back to the center. The center was what the Galactic Union called the collection point for both species that controlled the Galactic Union. It was originally three, but they had deposed the third and taken its own lands, its own planets, its own space for their own. This was something humans understood very well. They didn't like it, even though they understood it. As they reached out to the stars and began to push out, they realized that there might be a better way. They sent a message to the Galactic Center. We are coming. We are coming to sue for peace. Peace is what we desire. However, do not run. If you run, we will chase you across the entire Galactic Union and we will pay no mind to the casualties. We will destroy entire star system. What you have seen of our ships is not our entire arsenal. Weapons that we have will end entire galaxies, though we would prefer not to have to use them. Do not run. We are coming to you. That was what they sent to the Galactic Center. However, to the individual Xenos, they sent a different message altogether. They told them to break free of the Galactic Union. If they declare themselves free of the Galactic Union, break away entirely, and allow safe passage of human ships through their territories, they will not be engaged, and their own people will be returned as safe as possible. This, of course, was met with confusion for most Xenos, as they understood with war that once your group lost, those who fought and were captured alive became slaves, servants, indentured to those who had defeated them. This was their idea of the right of conquest. The humans seemed to have a different idea altogether. As the humans made the first few jumps towards the galactic center, they once again repeated their words to those who were in charge of the Galactic Union. We know who is in charge, and we know where your home planets are. Do not make us have to hunt you down. We will be at your planet in the time frame listed above. Do not run. If you run, you will simply escalate this conflict and bring billions, if not trillions, of innocent lives to an end. That is, unless you care nothing for those that you supposedly rule over. If that is the case, then by all means, run like the scared little bitches you are. Run with your tail between your legs, and we will simply hunt you down. Or you can have the courage to face us. Your choice. It was not long at all before members of the Galactic Union Council Those in charge of them decided that they would want their own lives saved, and they demanded that others go and fight for them. And it was not long before species after species, one, two, three, four at a time, denounced their membership in the Galactic Council. They declared their territories to reach at the borders they had prior to the Galactic Council. One or two might have grabbed a galaxy or two extra, but of course, there was plenty of space. The Galactic Council, of course, demanded that they remain and they fight for those that were in charge. However, the light had been shown that those in charge did not care for the other supporting Xeno groups. It didn't matter to them. As far as they were concerned, they were beneath them in technology, status, and pretty much everything else. By the time the humans had actually gotten within one jump of the Galactic Council planet, it was obvious that the Council itself was merely a shadow of what it once was. Those that remained simply shook at the idea of the human fleet jumping to their planet. However, they were ready for the final assault. At least they believed so. Orbital defense systems were brought online. The remainder of the fleet was ready with weapons primed, the best they had to remain. However, this was to say they might have been the best they had, but their numbers were less than 20% of the original battle. They knew this was a losing battle, yet they sent their own people up there to act as meat shields to the approaching human fleet. And when the humans arrived, things got very sporting very quickly. The human fleet did not even attempt to hide its numbers this time, as they knew that the Xenos understood the mass that was coming their way. However, they did jump in at the very edge of the solar system, which would take them approximately 8 days to reach the fourth planet from their star. This was where the Council was, with all their ships and their satellites sitting there waiting. As the humans approached, they sent out a message on repeat. To those forces in our way, stand down, and you will be able to return to your families. Fire on us, and you will not see the end of this day. The message again repeated, again and again and again. And as the humans began to approach, they got within the orbital path of the fifth planet. They saw something they did not expect. Dozens of the Xeno ships began to break formation, and as soon as they cleared the gravity well, jumped away. This confused them, at least for a moment, until several of the ships that tried to break formation were fired upon by their own orbital defense satellites. These Xenos were running. They were running for their lives because they realized this was a loser's gambit. No one should be told to ever sacrifice themselves for nothing. They realized that the leadership had sent them up there just to be cannon fodder. For what? For nothing. And they realized this. The final ships began to break formation and run as the defense satellites began to fire randomly into ships. As they saw the ships break apart, the admiral ordered that all human ships to flank speed and to take out those orbital satellites as fast as possible. Save as many of the retreating forces as they could, and they did just that. From impossible ranges, the railguns and torpedoes were fired. It may have taken several minutes for those projectiles to hit their target, but they hit with unbridled precision. Locking on to each one, the human fleet continued. They waited to fire on any of the ships unless those ships actually locked weapons onto them. This amazed the Xenos. How could a species so absolutely violent, have the patience, have the honor to hold fire as those who did not want to fight cleared the field. More and more ships saw this, and they must have realized as they began to break away and became under fire by their own ships. There were still zealots, of course, those who would hold the line no matter what, and they began to fire on their own brethren, firing entire broadside volleys of their energy weapons into their allied ships, and the humans watched in horror as these ships were punctured through by those heat rays that they used. Each one would melt through from one side to the other. They didn't even seem to care that their own friendly ships were on the other side. Friendly fire was constant as the humans continued at their best speed. It was at this point those on the ground for the Galactic Union, those screaming orders into their headsets as they tried to get their fleet under control, saw something they did not explain. Massive amounts of small ships launched from the human fleet and were traveling much, much faster than their massive dreadnoughts. What ships were these? Looking through the optics sent back from the orbital satellites, these same ships had that same red marking. They realized at that moment what these were. These were recovery craft. These were the ones that the humans had sent out to their own ships to recover their brethren from the battle. These were not ships designed to destroy. These were ships and crewed by those that were there to save. However, that didn't matter. They believed that if they did not stop the humans here, they didn't have a choice of surviving. It was at that moment one of the orbital satellites traversed itself and lined up for a shot at one of the medical frigates. That is when the humans seemed to lose absolute control. Every weapon that could be fired at that moment fired into the surface of the planet, straight through that orbital satellite and whatever ships were guarding it. It didn't matter. They fired wildly, trying to knock the satellite out of commission before it fired. And they succeeded. That satellite, when it did fire, fired wildly as it tumbled down to the surface, followed by several of the alien ships as they lost complete control and ran for their own life pods. Many, many life pods were seen on the sensors just launching out of the ships in any different direction. Some even launched back into space. And those ships with that red marking aligned themselves up to catch them. The leaders of the Galactic Union now stood just amazed as projectiles that did not hit their target as they were rush shots plummeted into their planet, along with any type of torpedo, missile, or anything that ranged that far. Half a continent was destroyed in a matter of 2 minutes and 4 seconds. It was the equivalent of a supervolcano exploding. The Xenos had never seen devastation on this scale before. It just amazed them. Even their own energy weapons, when they fired on a colony, were not able to do this type of devastation, as the beams must have been focused to do their damage. It was immediately set out that they surrender unconditionally, as they realized that the humans could just easily crack the planet in half if they chose. The alien fleet immediately stood down, with the exception of a half a dozen zealots who rushed towards the human lines, trying to take out those medical frigates. However, they did not get very far. What they had not seen as the carrier had already launched its drones, and they were overtaking the medical frigate as they were far faster than anything that was in the fleet. They got within range of the enemy zealots, and they tore them to pieces. Small parts of the hull would flake off, venting atmosphere. Several bodies or body parts would fly out. The drones would launch their small rockets as soon as they realized that the enemy shields were down. The rockets would penetrate the hull and explode inside, some hitting the reactor core, and a massive explosion, which was akin to a huge firework, would fill up the sky. The battle was over. The human fleet rested over the planet as they sent down shuttles to take care of the wounded and to send emissaries to the Galactic Council. The Galactic Council was shaking in fear as these bipedal creatures that barely stood 2/3 of their own height looked at them with sheer disdain, yet spoke through a translator in Galactic Common calmly. All of these humans standing in their dress uniforms with all their shiny medals and ribbons upon them simply stood there as the one in charge stepped forward. With obvious fear in his voice, the one in charge of the Galactic Union shook as he bowed his head down in submission and stated how he hopes that his slave master, whoever it might be, treats him well. The humans suddenly raised their heads, yet looking straight forward, began to look around to each other. What the fuck is he talking about? The commanding admiral simply looked at this Xeno and said, I'm sorry, we're not here to take slaves. Under the possible realization that he may be executed immediately, the Xeno in charge shit himself.